Hello and welcome to the webcast, Architecting Active Directory Federation, sponsored by Rackspace. I'm Lee Pender with Virtualization Review Magazine and the Ribbon Media Group. Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping details. Please feel free to type your questions into the Ask a Question box on the console at any time during the presentation. We'd like to have an interactive presentation, so we'd love to hear from you. We'll address as many of your questions as we can during the live event. The entire webcast is being recorded and will be archived for future viewing. We'll send you an email when the replay is available in approximately 24 to 48 hours after the webcast, and you can access the replay using the same link that you used today. We have a great presentation for you today. We have a couple of presenters. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. Benjamin Villanueva is here from Rackspace, but I'll let our host tell you more about him, and I'll introduce our host, Dan Kuznetsky. Dan is a reformed software engineer and product manager. He founded Kuznetsky Group, LLC in 2006. He has literally written the book on virtualization and often comments on cloud computing, mobility, and system software. He's been a business unit manager at a hardware company and a head of corporate marketing and strategy at a software company. And in his spare time, he does webcasts for us. And he also manages, is a managing partner of Lux Sonus LLC, which is an investment firm. Dan, I'm very happy to have you with us today. With that, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This should be a really interesting session for those who rely heavily on Active Directory. Benjamin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, that sounds great. Thank you, Lee and Dan. I really appreciate. Just a brief introduction about myself. My name is Benjamin Villanueva. I've been spending probably the last 20 years in IT. I have two of the top certifications from Microsoft. One of those ones is the Microsoft Certified Master in Directory Services, and that was in 2008 R2. And I did, after that, a couple of years ago, I got my Microsoft Certified Solution Master in Directory Services. That's for 2012. What I do focus on mostly right now is just the Microsoft Public Cloud, Private Cloud, Identity and Access Management, and how to tie these all in together, right? My current position right now is I'm an Azure System Architect at Rackspace. What that means is that I pretty much do everything with Identity and Access Management and everything that has to do with Azure. So that's just a little bit briefly about me. I'm excited to talk about this presentation. I think that Azure AD has gained some significant importance in today's world. And with that, before we start our presentation, I just want to go through a really quick poll question just to gauge where everybody is right now. And so if you would mind answering these following questions, I would. It's just one question. I just appreciate it so I can gauge how to lead the presentation. So the question is, please rank your familiarity with Azure Active Directory. If you've never used Active Directory, then that would be that one. If you use Active Directory but on a limited scale, that you've set up a trial, you've tried it out, and you're just messing around with it, that would be the second option. If you're actively using Azure AD, that is if you're actively doing using it for production, for development, for whatever your business needs are. And the other one, the last one, is if you're actually doing any type of heavy-duty Azure Active Directory. So if you would mind taking about 30 seconds to fill this out, I would really appreciate that.
Benjamin, this is Lee. You and Dan, I'll ask you both while the audience fills this out. Any predictions as to which answer will get the most responses?
I'm guessing that somebody's going to fall within actively using Azure AD. I'm hoping that is where we're at.
I feel the same way. Let's give everybody just about 10 more seconds, and then we'll have the reveal. What do you say?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, while everybody's filling that in, what I want to do is that I want to take this more as a conversation of what we're just going to be talking about, things that we've seen in the field, things that we've observed, and things that are going to help you further along the needs of using Azure Active Directory. And look at that. There we go. Well, there's our result. There's our big reveal. Never used Azure Active Directory before. Fantastic. So this is going to be a great session for you. This is going to bring you into some of the topics that are going to be of importance of just getting to know a little bit about Azure AD, understand the differences that it has, and just understand some of those things. So let's.
Benjamin, could you explain to us what is going to be covered? What are the details you're going to examine during your conversation with us today?
That is a good question. So let me get to my agenda slide here, and I think that basically there's 5 topics that I want to talk about, and those ones are, first I just want to talk about some of the identity models that Azure AD and Office 365 offer, how these two are tied in together. I'll show some illustrations of what those identity architectures look like within Azure AD and Office 365. What are some of those decision points for Azure Active Directory Federation services? Look at some of the common implementation scenarios for Azure for Active Directory Federation services. And finally, I want to leave you with what are some of the things you need to know before you start implementing some of those things, especially ADFS and some of those topics around those. I do want to think about Azure AD and Office 365. When I'm talking about Azure AD, I'm talking about both. They're both the same thing, Azure AD and Office 365. They both use the same infrastructure in the background. So that's why we label them both together in most presentations, just to give us some of those ideas. So I don't want you to go ahead.
Could you go into a little more detail about what Azure Active Directory Office 365 does for an organization? In essence, why should they care?
Sure. That's a great question. Thank you, Dan. So let's talk a little bit about Azure AD. And I think that for those that have never used it before, I think that what we need to do is that we need to just get a sense of feel. And what I have here on the slide is just some of the notion of what the technical terms around what Azure AD is. But then I want to translate that into something that people will probably understand a little bit better. What it is, so first it's a multi-tenant service, right? And this is one of those things that provides your identity and access across Microsoft's public cloud in Azure AD and Office 365. It's built on to support a global scale, which means that it's available worldwide. It's built for reliability and availability. And let's talk about those numbers a little bit, right? When we talk about when we talk about Azure AD as being a multi-tenant, that means that there are quite a significant amount of people that are actually using it today. Some of the latest statistics that I have from Microsoft are that currently Azure AD has 430 million identities stored in the cloud. The majority of these identities out of the 439 million, about 5 million of those ones are about small businesses, which means that they have less than 500 employees. And I think that a subset of those ones, another 5 million, are in the medium to large category that have more than 500 employees. And because those organizations are probably the ones that have the most amount of people, they account for 93% of all the identities in Azure Active Directory. When we go talking about some of the other features that Azure Active Directory has, we'll discuss some of the other statistics that I have around there, just to give you some idea of the scale of this product that they're offering. The other important thing to know is that this is backed by 99.99 SLA, and there's 3 different versions of Azure AD that we'll talk about here briefly, and those ones are this SLA agreement that Microsoft has with you is just going to be in the premium and the basic levels themselves.
So could you tell us what an enterprise or an organization could expect to get from using this technology? What does it do for them?
Sure. So here's a lot of things that when we're talking with customers, and that's probably one of the majority of the questions that we always get is, what can Azure Active Directory do for me today that I can't already do? And that's why I think that it's important that we start talking about some of these topics in a broader audience. And those ones are, when you're talking about the cloud adoption rate and how much it's grown in the past couple of years, one of the biggest things that it provides you, and I'll show this here a little bit later, but the biggest thing is it provides you a central place where you can manage all your users and access to all these different cloud resources. It allows you to keep on leveraging your existing investments that you've done on-premise, especially within your own Active Directory that you have on-premise. It allows you to just use that knowledge that you have and just extend that and continue to do what you do best and leverage the cloud to do some additional features that you just don't have or don't have the capabilities to do today to offer your users. Some of the biggest things that we've seen is that there's a huge proliferation of what is called, a lot of companies are encouraging their employees to bring your own devices, and so what we see is that there's this need to provide a single sign-on across all cloud applications. We just want to be able to just use our stuff and get going. We also know that there's always sensitive information that gets that can get leaked out there, and so we want to introduce some of these capabilities of just reducing that risk, and by enabling multi-factor authentication. That means that you actually have to validate that you are who you say you are, and leverage some of those capabilities. And we also think that it's really important that we support the development needs to build a secure directory and integrate applications for the enterprise. That basically means is that as you're building these applications, we want to be able to provide a way for you to allow your employees to gain the access that you need in the securest form possible. And Azure Active Directory provides some of these capabilities for you.
So would you spend a few moments talking about the different packages of Azure AD or different product units?
Sure. And I think that this is important for everybody that's here, right, Dan? I think that it's important that we start looking at why there are 3 different levels and why there's 3 different price points. Everybody has a different need for Azure Active Directory, and so I think that what we're going to look at in these couple of slides is just go over what are some of these levels, the free, the basic, and the premium, and why these 3 levels exist. For those of you who have never used Azure Active Directory, I think that you initially want to do is you want to start out with the free version, right? And the reason that you want to start out with the free version is because it allows you to gain some of the best knowledge that you need for managing access and resources within the cloud. Yet it doesn't really cost you anything to do that. But it does provide you some of the initial benefits that Azure AD has, and one of those ones is I think pretty much this directory synchronization, right? And we'll talk about that here in just a minute, what that actually means, and how we can leverage that. When you look at your basic one, we don't put prices here because that's all going to be dependent upon your agreement that you have with Microsoft. But if you look at your basic ones, here the difference between the free and the basic is just the level of customization that you can do, and the level of management and the level of self-service that you want to be able to provide your employees. We see this a lot with companies that like to brand themselves and making sure that they're able to just provide that additional level of value, saying that, yep, this is actually our page and this is our customization that we have. We also see that, as I go to the next slide right here, is that we see the other things that Basic does is this self-service password reset for cloud users. Now here is an important thing, right, is that in the Basic where it says self-service password reset for cloud users, that is only for the cloud users that exist in Azure AD. That means that these are not users that exist on your on-premise. These are just people that live in the cloud. When you get to the premium version, this is where it actually offers you the entire catalog, the entire suite of services that you want. We see a lot of larger companies going this route because of the enormous amount of employees that they have, or just the sheer number of requests that they have. And the biggest one is that self-service password reset. The majority of help desks that we've interviewed, the majority of their time spent, at least the 20 to 30% of those ones are resetting users' passwords that they've forgotten. Either they go on vacation, they forget those ones, and so that allows them to just offset that and provide a secure way for the employees to reset their password themselves. We also see that as organizations grow, we see a lot of group management and mismanagement. We see so many different groups that exist within an on-premise AD, and then we see that how do we manage these groups effectively? So then that's where we get this premium version where we're able to offer that ability for you to manage your own groups, or for a group owner to manage the users of that group. And I think Premium offers this great advantage of this multi-factor authentication, right? And that's where you can actually secure things and have people provide a more secure way, either your RSA tokens or your phone factor authentication or some other phone or some text messages that you can get for that. We get advanced usage and security reporting. This one is pretty important. I mean, you're probably aware of all of the news about things that have been leaked and hacks and stuff like that. This one is geared towards providing you some of that insight as to where things are happening within your environment. That is both on-premise and off-premises, and hopefully here in the near future we'll be talking a little bit more about and just have a special one about the security and those advantages there. And I think one of the most important ones here, Dan, that we talk about is, let's look at what is this Microsoft Identity Manager, server and user CALs. This one I think is probably one of the key things. Every company that we have over there, they have some form of master identity solution in-house already, whether it's a Microsoft or whether it's another vendor. But by providing you the access to, if you don't have an identity management solution, by providing you these licenses that you need, right there you've gained a tremendous advantage already of coming up with those ones. And we'll see that here in a little bit of how that can benefit you.
So could you go into a little bit more detail about the different functions people would typically use with Active Directory? And
sure.
What it would do for them?
Absolutely. So if we're looking at the first step that we need to do, and I labeled this slide the directory integration with Azure Active Directory. When we talk about directory integration, we're talking about coming up into this type of diagram, right? What we want to do is that we want to have Azure AD be the access control point. Now, what does this actually mean if we're talking about it? Azure AD should be an extension of your business. It should be an extension of the things that you provide people access to. It should be an extension for your partners. It should be an extension for other companies that want to do business with yourself. It should be just that control point. It should be sort of like this hub where all authentication takes place and where you control that entire workflow from end to end. Some of the things that we see is that we want all of these PCs and devices to be doing the authentication with the users against Azure Active Directory. We want to be able to bring all of your other directories that you have. You may have an Oracle identity platform, or you may have some other type of platform that you have, either eDirectory or something like that. You want to be able to bring those into a centralized, managed identity solution, right? And so we consider Azure Active Directory sort of like an identity as a service, as its primary function right there. So we can leverage its capabilities that has built in natively to be able to do all of the other things that we need to without changing anything that we have within our on-premises environment. We want to be able to take some of those ones and start using Office 365. We want to start using Windows Intune to be able to control a lot of our mobile devices. We want to be able to provide some custom line of business applications that we have in-house, yet available outside in the cloud without having to change the overall infrastructure that they're built upon. We want to offer dynamic CRM for your customer management. We want to bring all of these capabilities into this identity as an access control point, and that's where we think about Azure AD being the brain of the of your entire business. So let's talk about the three different ways that we can get you into this mode, right? What are some of the basic settings that we want to talk about, and the basic setups that we commonly see? As we're looking at some of these ones, we can see that this DearSync is one of the capabilities that Azure AD has. Today, as the current statistics that we have, there's over 1 billion authentications that occur in Azure Active Directory on a daily basis. Now, 56% of these come in from this type of setup as is showing up here on your screen. This is directory synchronization. And as we go through the other ones, I'll provide the statistics for the other ones that you have. But in this particular mode itself, directory synchronization, what does that actually mean for you in the terms of what, I mean, how can I explain it in a way that makes sense for you? So you have your on-premises AD. You have all of your users, and you have all of your groups, and you have your service accounts, and you have your computers, and you have all of these objects that exist within Active Directory. So if we take the example of a typical deployment of Active Directory, we have this particular user. They want to start using Azure AD and or Office 365. So Microsoft provides a tool that allows you to synchronize this identity or this Active Directory object and put it into Azure Active Directory. Now, even though Windows Azure Active Directory has the same name, it's not really the same. It doesn't really work the same as AD, right? It's just a flat topology. It's just a flat network. It's just an object that exists there for you to be able to add the controls that you need within it. So when you're synchronizing this object, all you're doing is taking some of the specific attributes that a user has, and you're just making a copy of those ones up into Azure AD. And when that user gets synced up there, that means that all of their information stays the same with the exception of their password. And so that's where you have the users will have a different password in Windows Azure AD than they do when they have their on-premises one. So that's going to create a sort of disjointed identity that you have this login for Azure AD with one type of password, and then you have your on-premises, which you're going to use a different password. And so we see that this is one of the challenges for a lot of businesses that are just starting out, is that when they do this initial synchronization, is that they have this different passwords, and it creates some confusion for the user. And so Microsoft has come out with a different option for you, and that is the next slide that we have here. And this one is where Microsoft said, okay, we've heard you, and we understand that there's something, but now we have the ability to actually take that password and create a hash of it. So it's not actually the password that gets copied up to Azure AD. It's actually just a hash. And what does a hash mean? It just means that it's a random 128-bit character that gets injected into that one that can only be deciphered by Azure Active Directory. Even if you took that hash and you tried to decipher it, it just wouldn't be the same as the password you have. So there's this algorithm that Microsoft uses in Azure AD to protect that hash from any type of wrongdoing. And when we look at this scenario, we see that it is pretty much the same as the directory synchronization, but with the option of providing you this password synchronization too. And this reason right here is that we see that that's why 56% of the authentications are using this method, is because it's probably one of the easiest ones to do. When you sync up your password and your user account up there, you see the same user, the same attributes kept there, but now they have a password hash. And this one is going to create this single type of what we call a same sign-on, right? And the same sign-on means that you're going to be using your same username that you have on-premise and your same password on-premise in the cloud. And when you're talking about Azure AD, having the capabilities of providing the same experience for your end users, I think is a huge benefit forward. And the majority of the authentications that take place are in this particular format, and so you can see the benefits already of there. If you have 5 million businesses with 500 employees doing this type of authentication, you think that it's a very popular type of setup. And this is the initial phase for when you wanted to get into some of the more advanced ones, some of the more advanced features itself. And that leads us to the final and the more advanced ones. When we're looking at these three scenarios, we correlate those two with what we're talking about, the free, the basic, and the premium versions. So this would be like the premium. This would be like the Cadillac of your engine that you want for your cloud users. This one, what we have right here is called the directory synchronization, but this one is the single sign-on with Active Directory Federation services. The difference between this one is the architectural requirements that you need and where the authentication takes place. This is probably one of the important things that we need to really understand, is that for the previous two models that we showed here, those two models show that the authentication is actually going to be taking place in Azure Active Directory. It's not going to be doing any type of authentication against your existing infrastructure. It's all taken care of by Azure Active Directory. In this type of scenario, we have 32% of all of those billion authentications that take place on a daily basis occur in this scenario. This means that Azure Active Directory is going to request a token on behalf of the user, and this requires you to have an Active Directory Federation services on-premise. So that means that when a user wants to authenticate, your user is going to be redirected to a service within your on-premises environment, and it's going to be another login page, and that page is going to bring you up into an authentication box that's going to say, hey, please enter your username and password. Once you enter that one, it's going to then send a security token to the trusted service that Azure AD is, and that is where it's going to provide you that type of access. So all of your authentication takes place on premise. It does require you to have a federation endpoints on premise, but in this case, it allows you to have this what we call single sign-on. When we're talking about accessing cloud applications, these are all web-based applications, sort of like if I use Internet Explorer and I go to Office 365, I don't have to enter my username and password. It will just automatically log me in because it's using our existing infrastructure and it's just passing all of those credentials up to Azure AD and Office 365 automatically for us. So we don't have to do any of that upfront work of entering our passwords. It just provides you the single sign-on, and it allows you this capabilities of just providing a more rich user experience. To get to this level of synchronization and to get to this level of capabilities, there's a couple of things that we need to take into account, and we'll talk about those ones in a little bit, and we'll talk about some of the common scenarios that we see, and what are some of the challenges that you're going to be facing as you're trying to implement some of these types of scenarios.
Could you spend a moment talking a little bit about the different levels of Active Directory and how you would choose and why you would choose one over the other?
Sure. And so as we talked about the last three, right, I provide the summary slide right here, and the reason I provide the summary slide is because when you're looking at all those pictures, it's kind of hard to really make sense of what you really need. And so this slide right here, I'd like to emphasize is that when you're looking at going to Azure AD or looking at to start using some of the capabilities that a public cloud offers, we want to make sure that you're choosing the simplest tool for your needs. If you don't need some of the advanced features for federation, then there's no need for you to go into such a catalog version when you're just starting to try it out. So I apologize for some of the small font right here, but I just wanted to make sure that I could capture as much information as possible into the slide. So there are three different tools that we have, and so here's where this confusion starts taking place, right? DirSync, Azure AD Sync, and now Azure AD Connect are three products that Microsoft has released over the past couple of years. DirSync being the initial one, Azure AD Sync being its second iteration, and Azure AD Connect being in its current form today. And I leave these three up there as just so you know where each one fits within the pie of the models. And so you see a synchronized identity model. These are the two scenarios that we talked about, right? And the last one, the federation services, is going to be the last column over here. And when this slide should be able to help you for you've never used Azure AD to just determine which one you want to do. DeerSync is no longer one of the products that you can download and install today. So the majority of you that have not started to use Azure AD, you're going to fit into that middle column right there. And so with that middle column that you have where it says Azure AD Connect, those are the features and the services that you're going to be getting off of the bat when you implement this architecture. When you look at the federated model, you're going to see all of the additional things that you get and all of the additional capabilities that are being offered to you, and just enable this richer type of experience for your end users. I think that one of the biggest things and the biggest advantages of using Azure AD Connect today is this self-service password reset. As we're looking at some of these capabilities, we want to make sure that again, right, always choose the simplest model. Use this chart right here to allow you to make that decision and make sure that you have that decision point of what you want to do, and then go with that as your initial plan. The benefit of choosing of starting off small and using Azure AD Connect is that you can always install the federation services right next to it, and you can have for example, if you decide to now you want to go to federation services, you still continue doing what you're doing with Azure AD Connect, but now you have this federation model that is sitting right side by side to it. And it allows you to, in case something ever happens to that federation services, you can always fall back to having that password hash as an alternative backup, so you can continue doing your business as normal. And so we see that these two models can work together in conjunction. You can go from one to the other with ease, going forward to federation or taking away from federation if you no longer have any needs for any of the advanced features. So always take a look at this chart. Use this one as your cheat sheet to see what is it that you actually want to gain out of it.
I imagine you've seen quite a number of different implementations. Could you talk a little bit about what people have experienced, the problems they've had, and maybe some discussion of best practices?
Absolutely. So when we're talking about this architecting, right, we talked about the different types of scenarios. We're talking about what are some of the things that you have to take into consideration when you're discussing architecture and architecting this type of Cadillac services for your end users and providing some of these advanced capabilities. The first thing that I want to do is I want to take, every customer, this is what, when we go out and talk with people, they say, hey, here's what I want. I want to have the ultimate identity component. I want to have one to rule them all. I want to have everything in a single place, and everything is just going to be perfect, and everybody's going to be able to do everything that you need to do, and it's just going to be seamless across the board. This is like the pie in the sky that everybody wants to achieve, right? This is where we want to go, and this is how we want it to look. When we're talking about having these capabilities and having these challenges that every customer desires, we find that there's always a mix of things. When we look at what are some of the more common scenarios that what we see when we go out to people, this is more like a common scenario. We have multiple identity tools, either because of political or because of other reasons. You have all these different identities. You have an Oracle database, you have an eDirectory, you have Active Directory. They don't talk to anybody. Now you have a Linux directory service over here that's doing for your Linux machines, and they all don't talk to each other. They're all separate identities. Everybody has to memorize all of these different users. We have multiple cloud tools, right? We have, well, there's some groups that are using Amazon. There's some groups that are using Azure. There's some that are using some other third-party cloud provider for whatever that business unit wanted to use. And so we see that we have these multiple different disparate identities. And some of these scenarios, I mean, they're very complex in the sense of how you can achieve what everybody wants. I just want to have one identity to rule them all. And how do I do that? And how do I take this to the next step, right? if I'm working at a company and I'm faced with a scenario like this where I have this huge complex environment with so many different entities that I need to do, there has to be something that we can do, and that's where when we start talking about, and that's architecting this federation service, we want to make sure that you understand that federation services is going to act like this hub for you. And the hub meaning that it's going to be like a federation hub that's going to allow you to integrate some of these capabilities that you need. And so when we talk about architecting the federation services, this is what a customer should strive to go to, right? This is what all of you that are just never used Azure AD before and want to get to. This should be like your end goal, your end diagram. This should be what you're architecting your business to be like. The first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that you standardize on an on-premise identity manager. Whether this is the one that is offered by Azure AD, which is the Microsoft Identity Management, or whether it's a different identity management platform. But you have to come to some type of agreement where you can have an on-premise identity manager that is going to push out the identities to your SQL, to your LDAP, to any of the other identity stores that you have, and that the identity manager solution that you have on-premise allows for pushing out of these users to these different services. At the same time, we need that identity manager to be able to provide that same user account to Windows Server Active Directory, so that we can use that information that that Windows Server Active Directory provides, use the Azure AD Connect as the bridge between your identity on-premise and Windows Azure Active Directory. And we want to make sure that you take full advantage of what Windows Azure Active Directory has as your federation hub for all of the other services that you have. Today, it is very possible for you to federate with other users, with other companies without using Azure Active Directory, but it requires a lot of work ahead of time. It requires a huge amount of effort. It's a big project. When you start leveraging Azure Active Directory, you can. It's a lot simpler for you because all of that infrastructure is already built into Azure Active Directory. It's already built into the capabilities that you require. And it creates it easier if the other company is also using Azure Active Directory. It just creates this really nice cohesive. And so when we're talking about that, right, the biggest question that we always get is, how should my organization provision identities in Azure AD? That one, we always want to make sure that you use Azure AD Connect. That should be your number one goal, right? Azure AD Connect should be the tool that you use to synchronize your identities into that. When we're talking about what authentication protocols you want to use, we always, again, right, I'll go back to that slide of saying that we want to make sure that you choose the simplest tool possible for your needs. And we look at what are the capabilities that you're looking forward to. So it can either be DirSync with password, or it can be Active Directory Federation Services. And so when we're talking about Active Directory Federation Services, there's two options that you have. The first one is that you can host everything on-premise, or you can host everything within Azure AD. It's as the Azure platform itself, using the infrastructure as a service capabilities that Azure has. So when we're looking at what you need to do to architect this one, this is probably in its simplest. Apologize, I didn't switch slides here for you. That's okay. So I'll just reiterate. Here's what the common customer scenarios have, right? We see all of these different identities. Just reiterate what we talked about, right? And this should be the end goal that you want to go for. This should be the end design. This is what we just talked about, right? This is how we want everything to be developed for you. Now, I'll go back to what we're talking about of what a recommended ADFS implementation is. And this one should be, it's a little small, but I do want to talk through it, and I do want to talk about what does this type of implementation look for you. I know a lot of you haven't used that Azure Active Directory yet, but in the sense of what you're going to need for some of this ADFS implementation is to just understand the requirements, right, and understand what it is from an infrastructure perspective, either on-premise or an Azure AD, and what those capabilities look like. So when you're looking at this diagram right here, we're going to look at this is a recommended implementation that we recommend having in Azure itself, right, in Azure Public Cloud as an infrastructure as a service. This allows two things, right? This allows you to be able to provide access to the services that your user needs, whether they're on-premise, whether they're remote, or whether they are somewhere else within the world. And this provides you the best user experience that it has, just because of the scale and the capabilities that Azure offers. We look at, there's two critical components right here, right, is how you're going to protect the services, right? A lot of these ones, what we see is that there's going to be ACLs that are available within those ones. We protect all of those resources in a sense that provides you only the endpoints that are going to be available to the world or to the users, and you can constrain those endpoints to only be specific to who you want to provide that service to. We see that when we're looking at an ADFS implementation like this, we need to make sure that we separate the two components that we have. We have like this DMC environment that is going to be the top one that is right below this little globe right here. What we call that there's going to be a load balance, there's going to be a web application proxy. You're going to require two of these servers. They're going to be the ones that are going to be serving in your DMZ. These are the ones that are exposed to the internet. These are the ones that are going to be your entry point for all of your authentication that you're going to be doing. When it goes through those web application proxies, then it's going to go into a separate inside network itself, and it's going to be protected again, right, by these network security groups that Azure provides, and it's going to go into your federation farm. We also require that there be two servers for every single one of these components to provide sort of this load balancing and this availability service, and making sure that service is always available. And those ones are the ones that are going to be talking into a third component of those ones, which are going to be your internal domain controllers. And all of this is going to be synchronized down at the bottom over here. It's all going to be synchronized or connected to your on-premises environment, either by an express route or by a VPN tunnel connection. And it's all going to be secured in that way that it's going to come back to your on-premises and provide you some of the capabilities. Your users, when they're on-premise, that's going to be this little blue line that comes up here to this other access control point. Those are the ones that are going to provide that single sign-on capabilities. And they're going to be going into the ADFS load balancer itself directly, and they won't be coming in through this one. That provides two things, right? It provides you a different user experience for your on-premises user, and it provides you a different user experience for the people that are outside in the internet or that are remote from your company, and provides you those access points that you need. So when we're talking about an ADFS and what we do to recommend this type of implementation, this is probably the simplest implementation that we can talk about. When we're looking at some of these implementations, right? ADFS can go into some of the larger companies where we have implemented ADFS across the world, where you need to have geo-load balancers and SQL servers and database mirroring and all this other fun stuff that we won't cover today. That'll probably be another topic for another time. But it's the extensibility that this type of implementation offers you in your business. Again, right? We always want to make sure that you choose the simplest tool for your needs. But this is where this is how we recommend every type of ADFS implementation to go forward with.
It sounds like it's a potentially very complex tool set. Could you help the audience understand how it can be used successfully? I mean, you've tried to give some simple rules, but it seems like maybe you have some rules of thumb that will make it even easier.
That's right, Dan. And I think that here's the things that and you bring up a really good point, right? So for all of you that have never used Azure AD before, there's a lot of things that you need to know, right? There's a lot of things that we recommend that you do just before you can start experimenting with some of this directory synchronization and synchronizing your identities. And here's where it becomes critical that you take into this view itself. There's a couple of recommendations that we always do for on-premise. What is it the things that you need to do to be able to start taking advantage of some of these things? The first thing, for those of you that have never used Azure AD, is that you need to develop this cloud strategy, right? What are you looking to achieve? What are you looking to provide your end users? What are you looking to do as a business to grow? What is the capabilities that you want to offer to your partners, to your customers? And so when you develop this cloud strategy, it's going to allow you to take in some of these considerations of what type of identity service you're going to be needing. Do you require ADFS or you don't? If you do require ADFS, then that's where it becomes a little bit more complex. But for every single customer that's never used Azure AD before, the first thing that we always want to do is we always want to make sure that you do a health assessment. And this means is that for every customer out there that we've been going to, there's usually been 1, 2, 5, 10, 15 different Active Directory or identity management IT professionals that have come into the company. They've come and left, and there's somebody else, and everybody does something a little bit differently. Now, this causes for a lot of irregularities within Azure AD itself, primarily around the required attributes that the users are required. What we call is we want to make sure that you call this as a cloud-ready Active Directory. That means that you've looked at what are some of those attributes that you need to fix, what are some of those things that are not in a consistent state, and you need to be able to provide some of those remediations before you can even consider synchronizing your identities. The other thing too is that when you're looking at a health assessment, you either gone through some mergers or acquisitions, so you have this single forest, or you have multiple forests, or you have a resource forest, and you have an account forest, and you have all of these different identities. How do I bridge those all together and bring them into a single cohesive tool that allows me to synchronize it to the cloud? Either I've had multiple email partners, or I have multiple email servers, or I have multiple other smaller companies that I've acquired, and they all have their own email address. Well, how do I continue to provide that ability to synchronize into a single either Office 365 tenant, Azure AD environment, and allow you to do that? So when you do this health assessment, that's where it's going to get into that point, right? Is that you look it over, you understand what is needed, you do the remediation that is required, and then you go into the next play, right? Well, so what is the server infrastructure that I'm required to support the solution that I'm proposing my company? Is that going to be AD Connect, which is going to be a smaller subset of components that I need than ADFS? What are the costs going to be associated with those with that supported solution? There's always things that you may not right now. You're probably not very concerned about how much it costs to have a server running within your environment because you have hundreds of them, and so it really makes no difference to you if you have 100 or 200. Some of the things too is that not only do you need to know what infrastructure you need, what the health of your Active Directory is, but then you need to understand a lot about the certificates and how that works, and what are some of the DNS requirements. How do I know what needs to go where, and how do I ensure that I can provide this type of user access either globally or regionally and provide the best experience possible? What are some of those requirements? And so I think that as you look at some of these capabilities and you look at some of these needs, you come into these primary recommendations. And I think that each one of these ones deserves its own topic in itself, just because of the breadth and knowledge that is required to do these. And I think that as you start formulating some of your ideas of how you want to take it, well, let's have you start by looking at some of these requirements and some of these recommendations and start going from there. When we come into what our recommendations are for Azure AD, and especially for those that are new, Azure AD is not just a username and password. You have a lot of other capabilities that Azure AD has, right? You have this new concept that Microsoft has developed that is the role-based access control for these services. You want only certain users to be able to access these services. You other want users to be able to access these other additional services. You don't want them to be to go on to other services. You want the finance group to just have access to the finance applications. You don't want to have all those ones. That's where your role-based access controls come into place when you start developing some of these tools. It allows you to keep what you have on premise, yet leverage Azure AD as your identity control plane to provide you the access to only the services that these users require. You also have understanding what type of monitoring and reporting you have for Azure AD. This is critical in the sense that you'd really need to understand what it is that you're going to be monitoring. Azure Application Proxy, again, right, it provides how do I provide secure access to the applications that I have on premises without having to change anything within the architecture. I just want to be able to provide those access itself. Multi-factor authentication that we talked about, conditional access. I want my employees to be able to access email, but I don't want them to be able to access OneDrive, for example. That is what some of the conditional. And some of the other things is federation with partners and other organizations. How do I federate with other people? How do I develop this whole stuff? And so we see that it becomes a challenge, right, as you look into this, and that's why I've seen a lot of people haven't gone into starting to use Azure AD because there's so much about it, and it's such a big topic, and it's very hard for you to be able to come into a sense of what it is that it's going to be. So. As we're coming to a close to our presentation, I want to just take a very brief moment and talk about, Rackspace as a company, and hopefully a lot of you have known that Rackspace does provide fanatical support for Azure AD, and so we want to be able to let you know that as we provide this fanatical support for Azure AD, we want to help you along your journey of getting into a cloud-ready state and provide you the abilities to move forward within your stuff. And so I'll leave the slide here just so you guys know that we do provide some of this information itself, and that we do provide some of these services and some of this knowledge, and we do want to be able to provide you the best expertise possible going forward.
Benjamin, we have a number of questions. Can I ask you one or two of them so that you can
Absolutely.
address them?
I wanted to leave time at the end of that one and just go through some Q&A and just making sure that we get those ones.
Okay. There's a question here. Is ADFS required for single sign-on? How would you architect a company with 500 PCs that doesn't have a domain AD structure? And the questioner actually is thinking of a particular company that actually is set up this way, and they have no local Active Directory. Can they go straight to the cloud and get single sign-on capabilities?
So the idea between ADFS, yes, is required for single sign-on, but you can provide them the same sign-on that they have right now, which is not the the single sign-on experience that we experience with regular cloud application. For this particular situation, they can put all these identities up straight into the cloud. There's a way that you can just use PowerShell and export all these 500 users, because you have no local AD. You can just export all the users into an Excel spreadsheet, import that Excel spreadsheet, and now you have this capabilities within those 5 users. The passwords are going to have to be manual, because since you have no on-premise AD that has a ability to do the password hash, so you would have to have everybody reset their passwords once they get into that particular point itself. But yes, that would provide you the same sign-on, not single sign-on, because ADFS is required for the single sign-on experience.
We have another question. Does ADFS run in a virtual machine setting?
Absolutely, it does. And here's something really important that we need to be aware of, right? We need to be aware of the requirements that is needed for the ADFS servers. Depending on the amount of users that you have, you want to make sure that you allocate enough resources to those ADFS servers. The majority of the implementations that we've done have been on virtual servers. All you need to do is making sure that you allocate the appropriate resources for the number of users that you have. And when we're talking about virtual machines, right, when we're talking about virtual machines, the proposed infrastructure that we have up there is going to be, we do want to ensure that all of those ones are going to be virtual machines anyways, right, in Azure AD, in Azure itself.
Another question here is if authentication occurs on premise, does that mean if the server is down, they'll not be able to log in?
So that always brings up an interesting point, right? So there's two things that we talk about right here. If the Federation servers themselves are down, there is no authentication that takes place. So that is an accurate statement. There's another situation where we have our proposed infrastructure providing Azure Federation services within Azure, the public cloud itself. There, it's going to be dependent upon your internet connection. If your internet connection is down, you're not going to have the authentication that is capable itself. So those are the two common scenarios that we see. Absolutely.
Here's another question. If I have the free version, is that why it's so difficult to do some basic things with SharePoint Online, like not being able to send email notifications for workflows to our Office 365 distribution list?
If you have what version?
It's listed as the free version.
So if you have ADFS version 3.0, so that goes back to, again, right, is if you're having a lot of the authentication problems that you have within your Azure AD or SharePoint Online and the capabilities of sending things to Office 365, the way that you tie these services in together are different from your standard approach that you would have from on-premises. And so the majority of times is that it's just a misconfiguration of the way you've implemented that scenario. And the challenges that we see a lot of our customers experience with those ones is because of the natural way of tendency of doing things on-premise does not carry over to do things in the cloud. And so that's where we come into some of this disparate itself. ADFS 3.0 is the one that we recommend to do because of its simplicity that it has and the more important capabilities. So I think that is really important that we make sure that you're running the latest version of ADFS that has a lot of these newer built-in capabilities.
Well, thank you so much, Benjamin. I think we've just about run out of time. Lee, did you want to say a few final comments?
I apologize for the interruption. Lee's line has disconnected.
Oh, dear. Well, I guess I'd like to thank Benjamin and everyone else who attended. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I'm sure if Lee was here, he would tell you that a recording of this event will be available in 24 to 48 hours. Thank you so much for attending.
Yeah, thank you for joining. I know that there's quite a lot of questions that didn't get answered, but we'll take these ones and we'll continue to work on some of these other topics here as well. And I think that there's a lot of valid questions, and that's why we like to do these things, is just to be able to come in and just provide you the information that you need to be able to make those decisions. But again, thank you for joining. Thank you, Dan, for assisting me. I really appreciate it. And you know where to contact us if you have any questions, and we're here to help you.